You're listening to the official podcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles, a community of individuals and families connecting with God to change the world.
All right, let's just bring the party to a little bit of a break here. As it was mentioned, we're continuing in a focus this latter part of the fall that we've entitled Minding the Gap. And it's really about looking at the fact that Jesus said one of the greatest signs of God's breaking into our world and our human way of living it is the ability to unite people in God across their differences. And so we're looking at the gap that lies between us and those we were intended to be able to be in relationship with. And we believe that when Jesus moved forward in this movement we call the church, of which the Westside Vineyard is a part, that we're created to help bring together what the world pulls apart, to bring together Democrats and Republicans. Like if we pull that off, the rest is like easy, you know? But also the rich and the poor, however, that one might look at socioeconomic dynamics and the way it affects our lives, but also our ability to relate to each other. And also our cultural, racial, ethnic differences that can create prejudices and conflicts. And as we looked at last week, young and old, and all the ages and stages of life, and how God desires us to be able to come together in a dynamic way, in a way that honors both and everybody in between. And this week, I want to look at one more gap and conclude with this, and that is what we might call the neighborhood gap. The gap that lies between us and our neighbors. And many of us, if we think about the neighborhood gap, we realize, this is a little closer to home, pun intended. The truth is, this gap is about where we actually live and the reality of that living space, whether it be an apartment or homes in a neighborhood or both, but it's about that kind of space. Now, I know that most of us have heard a lot about the changing dynamics and how relationships socially in current culture seem to be adrift, seem to be kind of dissolving, and so the effects on neighbors and neighborhoods is being lost. And I won't try to speak at length to that. Most of us, I think, can identify, but I'll just mention, just a few of the big sociological shifts that can help us appreciate that I think we don't even feel the dynamics of our neighborhood because we're so used to it. It's the new water we swim in that we don't even realize how actually unusual we are as human beings. Because most people, they're raised in, a village or where people came together and they had to do life, right? You had the common well. So everybody has to come to the common well or the common source of water, and not anymore. We've created, one of those things is we've created the potential to separate, whether that be by suburbs, garages, fences, all sorts of ways to create separation, and for which we never have to come to the common ground. And so we're part of those who have lived lives in which it said, good fences make good neighbors, right? Well, that might have some truth to it, and I can appreciate it, but stop and think about that for a minute. It's kind of an unusual thing. And then along with that, think about just the effects of the automobile, which historically, if you look back, you're talking was only recently. How did that affect it? Imagine no car. You're like, oh my gosh, I'd be stuck at home. You would do your whole life at home. You would never go off to other places. You'd have to live your whole life within the boundaries of your feet. That would change a lot. And then think of one more, and that is the advent, even more recently, of personal entertainment. It started with a thing called the television. Some of you that are younger this morning, that's kind of an old concept, but television was the beginning. But now we have lots of forms of personal. What does that do? It means that when I want to be stimulated and engaged in some way, I go to a machine. Whereas I would have had to go to what? Other people. It changes us radically. So you and I really are living in a very different dynamic, and it affects us. And then you add to that one more thing that I think we see so much, is you probably feel this on the West Side, and that is mobility. We are people who easily kind of move, and you never have a sense of really belonging in the same way that people once belonged somewhere. They belonged not just to the place, they belonged to people. Like, oh, this is where I live. This is my people. Now we kind of have a sense of place. And place changes. I want to live in this place and that place. Do you hear what's missing? It's not in relationship to people. It's more just a place. We're more like tourists who are fascinated to explore a place for a while, and when we're done, we'll go explore a new place. And we live with very little sense of permanency being a part of anything. Nothing is very settled. And so all of these changes affect us. And so Jesus comes and speaks into our calling to love our neighbor, and it's affected by all those things. We just don't easily hear it, but I want to invite us to hear it afresh. How into that he says, I understand you don't necessarily naturally know how to actually love a neighbor, and I mean an actual neighbor. So I invite you to join me, and let's look at where Jesus picks up, and we find this in the Gospel of Luke, among other accounts. And there's a religious man who's coming to Jesus, religious in the sense that he's not a professional religious person, but he is obviously deemed to be educated, probably was considered respectful among the religious. And he comes to Jesus, who people looked at as kind of almost a rabbi and more. Like, he comes as a rabbi, but his sense of authority, we're told, the people saw as not just counting on men's ideas, but actually of speaking the authority of God. So they're amazed by him and a little intimidated by him. So he hears Jesus. This is his opportunity to engage this figure who people are even saying could be the Messiah, the Savior sent from God. And he takes up with him a common question that would be asked to a rabbi. Rabbis had different traditions about what they viewed as the most important matters. What are the most important commands? How do you sum it up? What's your perspective? So he asked that, and Jesus and him engage around this issue. And the conclusion is this: love the Lord your God with all of your heart, and with all of your soul, and with all of your strength, and with all of your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. Do this, and you will live. So Jesus is affirming that the most central part of the human soul that we need is to form our lives around our primary affections being in God, where we understand that he is the source of all life and of all love, and we find our affections in him. Everything that is beautiful emanates from him, and so we naturally find our affections on him. And he is the beginning and the end, so our future lies in him. And so our affections are centered in him, and out of that flows a love for those that he created to bear his image and be with him forever, which is our neighbor, those in our lives. And Jesus says, do this, follow this, grasp this, these two things. Now, how you live it out, obviously there's lots more to it, but these are what are central. This is the heartbeat. This is the plumb line of life. And the man's kind of seems a little bit like, that part about do this and you'll live? Let's see, how could we kind of veer this in a more esoteric way? Let's not get into real neighbors here. So he throws it, well, who is my neighbor? Let's just kind of go ethereal for a minute. Let's talk, out there. And Jesus, we pick up in the story. Luke picks up on what's going on and tells us. And we pick up in verse 29. It says, the man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied with a story. This is often the case. A Jewish man was traveling on a trip from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. And it's a road that people know is full of mountains and crevices, and this was not so uncommon. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along, but when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant, or one from the Levite tribe, walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed on by the other side. Then a despised Samaritan came along. Now, to the Jewish ear, this is when they'd go, boo, because this is truly those who they did deem to despise, as those who had sold out and married into the people of Samaria. And when he came and saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here. In other words, I'll be back for him. Now, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? Jesus asked. The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same. So we have this exchange that is centered on what really matters. That's the question, right, that's being posed. What really matters when Jesus is asked? And it comes down to this issue of love God and love neighbor, and then it really wants to expound on the significance of loving neighbor and really engaging that. And I want us to not miss that simple point, because I think one of the truths that I hope we kind of can take in front of us is that loving our neighbors really matters. Loving our neighbors really matters. Now, I know that's simple enough. And for a lot of us, just like me, you might think, oh, okay, so this morning we're just kind of focused on one of those basic things. I already knew that, by the way, that I'm supposed to love my neighbor. So, at this point, it doesn't really matter. I already got it. I know the answer to the question. I should love my neighbor. You understand that the whole point of this story is the problem that we think we have the answer, but we haven't really become the answer. The whole point of the story is the man thinks he's got the answer and everything's cool, but he's starting to feel and face the fact that he doesn't really get it yet. And that's why we have to face that a little bit. See, we can become a lot like this man, where we think, I know the answer, and once I know the answer in terms of some cognitive truth or some proposition, I'm okay. But I'm actually not there yet. My being has not caught up with what I know to be true and good. And that's what we find here. You get a sense that this man's a little bit intimidated by Jesus, that he kind of recognizes, like a lot of people around him, that Jesus makes you a little uncomfortable. Just when you think you're a little bit cocky, like, hey, I got it down, I'm good, something about Jesus helps you face yourself. And you get a sense that when this man said, love your neighbor as yourself, and Jesus puts the words right back in front of him, that he's like, I don't really want them hanging right in front of me, because there I face that truth with my life. And some of us need to do that too. Just face the fact that we've got this, where am I in it moment that we need to have. And so it is that we read in verse 29, it says, the man wanted to what? Justify himself, his actions. So he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Let's just keep it up there. I want to justify myself. That means there's something about the way he's living that is not probably really reflecting something of God at work in him, and he wants to somehow feel okay about it. And if you think about the story that Jesus tells, he brings a Samaritan, an outsider, into play. And there is the grand offense to this guy. So you can imagine that probably this man is thinking, I know how to care for the people who are like me, my own type. I'm pretty decent about loving those that I deem to be equals, to be cool enough, to be, included in my life. But Jesus messes with him by including somebody who would be deemed an outsider, with the whole question of who are neighbors. And there we might be challenged by this too, to recognize that we're in danger of justifying our lack of really loving our neighbors when we think we set the standard, when we think we get to say it's on our terms. So we ought to keep listening to what Jesus is bringing to bear on us, because otherwise this story only reminds us how much we are like him, that we're justifying, we think we have it down, that we can be in danger, especially when we start talking actual neighbors. The real ones, the jerk that lives next to you, that one. The one that you so disagree with or doesn't like you, that one. When we start talking about them, this starts getting real, and that's what Jesus was intending to do. So he tells the story, and it begins with a fellow Jewish man who's making this traverse from Jerusalem to Jericho. The road of that goes over these mountains, common for robberies to take place, very kind of vulnerable. And so he is attacked, and his clothes are stripped. He's left for dead. There's a very dramatic kind of need at hand. And there we're brought to the truth that Jesus sees about neighbors. And we shouldn't miss it. It's this, that there are lives along life's pathway that are wounded and in real need. When we hear this story, we kind of hear this, wow, that's quite a story. We're used to big drama and stories, but, it is a pretty big deal. He's really robbed by these bandits, left in this horrible fashion. He's left for dying. This is obviously doesn't relate to our neighbors, we think. Like, this is a little too dramatic. My neighborhood, come on. People drive decent cars, most of them. Nobody's going unclothed. Nobody looks wounded. So it doesn't really relate, does it? I think Jesus is not trying to say that it always looks like that, but I think he would say, oh, really? I see a world where everybody's oppressed, spiritually oppressed. They are wounded and dying. But we can't see that. And we're so distant, we can't. Standing across the road, you might not really grasp it. But actually, people are wounded and dying. I got a call about 3 weeks ago. And I thought it was kind of the wrong number because I just hear somebody from some county office saying, oh, this is Mary Paz Cardenas. I am the deputy of the governor or coroner's office or something. And I thought, who is this? And then she goes, I need to know if you know a man by the name of Forrest Wellman. And when I heard that, I thought, oh, yes, I do. I've always known him as Jim Wellman, but I knew his actual name was Forrest Wellman. And I'll tell you something about Jim. Jim was this very distant relationship, I have no idea, very many times removed, who, when he was very young, his mom had been his dad had been an alcoholic, his mom died of a disease, and so at that point, very troubled, he was taken in by some cousins. It did not go well. He felt hurt by them, and about 18, he left. Now, I remember him at some Christmas parties, like every year or two. I vaguely remember him, because he would come. But then we never saw him really again. Turns out the only person who ever continued to have any relationship with him was really my dad. And my dad was far removed, but it was just his heart to not let this man be kind of totally lost. And so at one time I came along and would try to meet with him as well. The years went on. My dad would just about once or twice a year try to go and meet with him. And then my father passed 3 years ago, and his last thing that he said to me is, take care of him. So took that to heart, met up with him. Now, to give you an example, though, of who he was, this man had never had, he turned 70 this year, never had human contact since he was 18, and I mean none. None. He's lived from 18 to 70 with just dark glasses and kind of estranged. I went out to help him because I was the only person that he could find that to get an operation could come and pick him up from the hospital, which they required. So I went out to Pomona a few months ago and found that he lives underneath a house, like in a basement, really just a basement. You have to go down to this little cellar door, and that's where he lived. Very tragic. But I've known him these years, and it was a good time, and valued it. But she was calling to tell me that that they found him dead. And I just thought, not shocking that this could happen. And they would never have even known, except they were delivering something and had to eventually kind of get in. And so they had found him. So I said, I will help in terms of connecting with some family, because I'm not related, hardly related, but I'm the only name they found in his apartment up somewhere. So I said, let me see what I can do, and followed up. As I did, I asked her this question. I said, Mary Paz, can I just ask you, is this what you do as a job? Do you try to find people who are unclaimed and have no connection? I said, yeah. I said, wow, that must be hard. She goes, it is. Sometimes it's a joy, too, because you find people that have been lost their connections. I said, how many? She said, about 200. In LA County alone, 200 a month. I found out 6 people every single day are taken anonymously to the Los Angeles Cemetery in Boyle Heights. Unknown. No connections. There at the cemetery, they have what they call the common grave. In the common grave, after they've they've done a cremation, they bring the ashes, and they are placed into the common grave, of which there is a book that is 1,000 pages long, every page a list of names that have been unclaimed, unknown, unconnected. There are so many people in this world that we think have more connections than we know, or have connections that have become so limited, so full of conflict, so much unresolved that they don't really have as much connection as we think. And behind a lot of the doors in which you live, you might see something just like Yvonne shared, where she shares that this woman was just kind of had a wall or an outer front of kind of being difficult, but behind it was a life of wounds, just like Jesus said, wounded and dying. And sometimes very people who have great means and are well-to-do and are successful, trust me, they are most likely the ones who take their lives because inside they are wounded and dying. And so Jesus is describing something that is like he wants us to get it. He wants us to grasp that and to care and to see what he sees. And so it is that he tells the story of how these men come about. And of course, they can't miss this. These wounded, beat up, and naked, right? You can't miss that. Well, apparently you can, because he tells a story about how the religious priest comes and goes, oh, and walks to the other side and makes his way on, as if maybe he didn't quite see what he thought he saw. Well, yeah, but that's a priest. He's a very busy man, you know. If he had an assistant, they're the ones who take care of everything, right? That's what assistants do, right? Then it says the Levite came along. You know what the Levites were? They were the tribe who were the assistants to the priest. So the temple assistant comes by, and he takes care of it, right? No. It says he also passes by. And here we're challenged by this truth, that if we feel we cannot stop to consider our neighbors because we're too busy and preoccupied, especially with religious activity, we may be missing God's priority. You might think, that's kind of weird that these two were like a priest and these were the religious leaders and they passed by this man? That's kind of ironic. I wonder if Jesus caught the irony. He wrote the irony. He wrote the story and he's bringing forth this to us. He's saying that there's nothing more insidious than missing it because you're too busy and preoccupied, even more insidious if it's with your own sense of religious activity. There's something missing. We're really missing something of God. And if we love God, and this is going to flow through us, we will not miss our neighbors. We won't pass by the other side. There's something we need to get here. And oftentimes I think that when I read this, I think, yeah, but I can feel that way. I can feel like them. I'm busy. I need to get somewhere. I'm rarely ever going anywhere that I'm not going somewhere, you know, that feeling. So it's not like, oh, there's my neighbor. I'm going to wave because I don't have time for a real conversation. Or, you know, I don't have time. I feel the tension. And so I feel the fact that they may have thought they were on their way to somewhere important. But here's the interesting thing in the story. We're never told that they were that busy. We're never even told particularly that they were on their way somewhere important or had a meeting. Actually, we have one indication of one of the individuals being on their way somewhere. They had some responsibilities, and it's the Samaritan. You notice that when the Samaritan takes care of the man and he gets him to an inn, what does he do? He says he has to go on and take care of some business, and he'll come back. He had business to take care of. We're more made aware of that. Jesus is not telling us a story that differentiates between those who are just very, very busy and can't take care, and those who have nothing to do. So they take care of somebody because you can only have compassion when you have time. That's not the story. The story is between those who didn't and a man who did have responsibilities, but he stopped and he cared. And that's why it confronts me and jars me and challenges me, because it says that somehow you can still care, you still have to navigate it because it is what God sees. So luckily there was this other man who comes alongside, the Samaritan. Now they'd consider him a villain, but this is where he switches it. It says, when he saw him, in verse 33, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with oil and wine and bandaged them. Most translations would say simply, when he saw him, he went to him. I want you and I just to sit with that, because if there's nothing else we sit with, there's nothing else that I need to hear, It's that. When he saw him, he went to him. That's what Jesus wants to be true of us. That's it. When we see, we go over. It means he crossed the road. They didn't want to cross that road, but he crossed the road, and we have to cross the road. Man, it's a real road. It's with real people. Imagine, what do you think this man must have had to have crossed over in terms of what was there, what was involved in this dynamic? What do you think he must have crossed over in terms of what it reflected or what was loaded with? I'm asking that. I'm asking for a thought. Yeah, John.
Maybe a bunch of people going by, pulling a donkey or some food, almost like a traveled road.
Okay.
And like, oh, everybody else isn't going to help him. Why should I go and get through them and to get over to him?
So there might be looking at what other people think of helping that person. I have a neighbor who, when I think of helping him, others' neighbors say, why would you? So, there's that. It kind of creates that. What else? Well, what else would he have been crossing in this dynamic? Yeah.
I think he would have been also crossing cultural barriers, maybe. He's a Samaritan. They're not supposed to associate with Jews or
cultural barriers. I'd say cultural conflict. This man despises him. This man hates him and this man doesn't want to be touched by a Samaritan, this Jewish man, because he'll be deemed unclean. If I go to him, all of his animosity, all of that will arise in him. So I don't know if I want to get into that. Maybe you think, gosh, you know what? I know this person's politics. I don't know if we're going to have an easy conversation. We have really different political views. I don't know if I want to engage him. There could be conflicts. Yeah. I think there's a lot of things that could be felt here. The conflict, the fear of what others say, just a lot of fears. I mean, the guy was beat up by bandits and left, right? They robbed him. Maybe they're still around looking to bring harm to me if I go to tend to him. They could be right there. There's a lot of danger. If I get involved with this life, maybe there's dangers for me. I mean, their life's messy. Maybe I should just not get involved. And then there's ultimately just indifference. Look, I have my busy world, they have their busy world. I'm sure they wouldn't want me coming and getting engaged with that. I mean, we each have our boundaries. We've worked them out very well. So I really don't need to get involved. That's really maybe the hardest thing. It's just this basic indifference. But here what we see is to love our neighbor will require crossing the road, including that road of indifference. That you and I may have to cross that road, whether it be the literal street, it might be the courtyard in your apartment building. I know some of your living spaces, so I know that there's a variety of types of ways, but it's crossing not only that space, but what it represents. And we may need to do that. And so Jesus goes on to describe how he helped him. He cleaned him. He bandaged him. He met immediate needs, but he understands that this man's going to need some kind of, longer-term care. So he gets him down the road, down to the next area where people are together, and he finds an innkeeper, and he makes sure that the innkeeper is going to get involved with this man's life now, which is a beautiful thing. And I don't know that it's really just a tangent. I think Jesus might be reminding us in that helping to be a good neighbor also means helping neighbors come together in relationship. Because this man is also now bringing somebody else into play in this wounded man's life. And sometimes that's part of what we do. The deepest need in our neighborhoods is connection. Somebody to help bring connection. That's what we're really called to. And that is the power of hospitality in doing so. Or as you see in this next section, which I will touch upon only quickly, we can provide a bridge to the neighborhood by the power of hospitality. God's antidote, if you will, for the separation of humanity. The one thing you and I can bring that can work itself out and engage into a world divided relationally, especially in our spaces, is hospitality. Now, a lot of us might think, I know. I love people who throw really good parties. I'm not one of them, but I love people who do. You know, I like to go to them, and we kind of separate this out as if there's people who are gifted and there's people who are just there to go. You know, that's not the dynamic here. Yes, there is a spiritual gift, by the way, of hospitality. It means somebody who finds very special sense of favor and flow. You've experienced them. Some of them were at the door this morning welcoming us. They help us gather together. They help people gather together. And they help it in the beautiful spirit of God's inclusion. But all of us are told, in Romans it says, practice hospitality. Other translations say, be inventive, be creative the way you do hospitality, but always do it. It's not just for the gifted, it's for all of us. And it's where we get the word hospital. It's creating a space for those who would be estranged to be able to come and connect. Originally, the word hospital wasn't quite what it is today. It was a place, like a hospice, for those who were estranged making their way through life. And that's part of what God's inviting us to be able to do, is to carry in on that. And I'm just going to mention very quickly a few principles that might help us understand the dynamic of being those who can create connection through hospitality. The first is this, that hospitality flows from God through our own experience of profound inclusion. I think one of the things we think of with hospitality that I want to help correct is that we think, okay, so I have to find within myself this, it has to emanate from within me, this whole kind of inclusive space that people come into. It doesn't ultimately emanate from you. You don't have to create a world of hospitality. It's already there. God created a world of hospitality. God's already met you as one who does not deserve to be included in life with him, but is. God is willing to make it possible for you who does not deserve to be included in life with him to be included. So you don't have to create the world. You just have to join it and let it come through you. You see that? That's what he's saying coming on. This is why Jesus got in trouble all the time, because he actually lived out that reality. And it bothered people because they defined things more in exclusive ways. So he carries this on because this is divine hospitality. William Barclay said that true Christianity was and still should be the religion of the open door. I love that. It is so true. And that the Bible reflects the understanding that truth is exclusive, but love is not. So we need to let our hearts flow from that hospitality. And number two, hospitality includes, but it's not limited by our homes or our places of living. Homes are so the center of things because your home is the space that you bring people into. That's who you include people. And the meal is an expression of that. That's why almost all of the troubling and beautiful stuff that Jesus did had to do with whom he was with, where he was with them, and the meals he shared with them. That's it. Very powerful, very profound. And we need to understand that the thing that you and I steward, that may be the most powerful thing that we steward, is not merely our time and our treasure and our talents, but also it's our living space. You are steward of it. What you do with your living space, have you ever thought about that? Like, what am I really doing with it? How do I express inclusion through it? It's really one of the beautiful things that's been entrusted to us. But some of us might say, I really don't have an opportunity. I have roommates that wouldn't be for that, or I have a situation where I'm limited. Some of you don't even have homes. I mean, there are those among us right here who have no place to live. So there's limits, I understand, that can be there. But anybody can take someone out to eat. Someone can bring somebody some food. Somebody can maybe include a coworker that doesn't get included out for lunch. There's other ways we can exercise hospitality. But I encourage us to grasp the significance of that space. Thirdly, hospitality appreciates the significance of offering what's special, but is centered in the simple. You know, I think when you think of Jesus, he told of these incredible banquets and these stories, but he also told about the basics. He said, if you even just extend a cold cup of water, just a cold cup of water, you're extending the profound power and message of the kingdom. That's a big deal. Just a cup of water has the power to do something significant in what it communicates. And it may be quiet, but eventually it becomes clear. So keep carrying on even those things. It's important not to confuse hospitality with entertaining. They're not the same thing. Entertaining people is not the same thing as hospitality. They may involve each other, but hospitality is not about the place, it's about the people. It's about how we relate to the people. Fourthly, hospitality involves initiative. What we see most is that there was that passive going around the road, but Jesus is telling a story about the one who saw it and he took initiative to go towards it and engage it. And that's the hardest part of loving our neighbor. The hardest part of you and I loving our neighbor is the initiative it involves. Because there's gravitational pull, at least in me, I'm trusting it could be in a few of you, that is towards my self-centered nature. And also, I'm kind of an introvert. I just want to, look, life is kind of overwhelming. Home is the place I don't engage. Home is the place I pull back from engaging. So everything in me wants to pull back, pull up the drawbridge, get the alligators in the moat, which is turning your phone on. I don't know what. But the idea of initiative to open up space to another is not easy. And let's get honest about it. We live with the thought that my world is, I want to keep it simpler and kind of smaller. It feels overwhelming. And if I open up and engage a neighbor, I'll just feel overwhelmed. It's true. That's where a lot of us are. But here's the lie, that you think your life will be more confined. Will it? You ever talk to a neighbor and had this amazing conversation come up and you're talking about life? Did your life feel smaller? Felt bigger. Because it expands your life with the things of God in it, with people. It actually gets richer and bigger and better. So actually we need to say, you know what, my life is actually too small. Outwardly it may be busy, but it's too small. I need to create space for the neighbor. I need to create space as big as God's space. And that's what we're invited to do. And that's what the challenge is that Joel talked about. It's helping us to take that initiative. And so, as we said here, and you see there, we have a practical challenge to bridge the gap with our neighbors. And it could really be summarized this way, that it is about knowing and gathering. We're encouraging you to know and gather your neighbors. One side of this sheet is kind of the know. It has the 9 squares. And it says, think of yourself as the center square, and the 8 squares around you are the 8 neighbors that live closest to you. That might be physical houses. It might be apartments around you. Whatever it might be. Who are the 8 people who live around you? And can you and will you pursue trying to know the names of those 8 neighbors? The vast majority of people cannot name, in case you're going, uh-oh. The majority of people cannot name the names of the 8 closest neighbors around them. So a good goal is to know them. But one way to do that is also to gather them. And most neighbors may not remember each other's name, but to gather them. And so we found that in our culture, there really is an opportunity that is so easy, and we want to say, don't miss it. It's the holidays. Everyone kind of gathers around holidays. Most apartment buildings, most condo units, most neighborhoods, people want to be connected. And the kind of most lightweight connection you could make is say, hey, what if we just got together? I was thinking of just having a little holiday get together and just connected for a minute, a little bit, and just have some cider and dessert. So you don't go for the big formality. We're not sitting down one-on-one for dinner for 5 hours. We're just going to have kind of a drop-in kind of time. You would be surprised. I can't tell you how many people have done this and said, I didn't think anyone was coming. And oh my. My wife and I did it. We talked to a couple neighbors a couple years ago, and they said, still thank you. I got the, I'd love to. We're going to be out of town. We're thinking, oh, great. Nobody's coming if they're not. So 4 o'clock came around. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. The house was full. And we're like, can't believe it. We're looking at each other across the room like, okay, we were just about to close this up. It is full. And they're all meeting each other. Why? Because they want to. They want to connect. And we're encouraging you to do a holiday get-together. Just a holiday. Call it a holiday, not a Christmas party. This is just open across all cultures. And do it maybe not as a dinner, do it like an afternoon thing, kind of drop by so people feel safe. And people want that. They want a little bit of I'm not sure how comfortable I'll be. I had more people say, well, we might drop by, and what we started to realize is they're really just needing it to stay safe. If we'd said, we're having a dinner, a meal, formality, it might be hard. But you make it light, and we're finding people are pouring out. I'm going to tell you, a lot of you might think, well, you as pastors, that's your, you guys probably, are different. Really? I have news. We have the same fears. We're all going, oh man, I'm totally afraid. I'm an introvert. I don't feel comfortable with my neighbors. I don't. And guess what? There's awkwardness for me too. But trust me. I could tell you some stories about my neighbors. And you know what? Every person that's part of the pastoral leadership, from youth to every one of them said, I'm in. I'm doing it this year. Some did it before. Everyone said, we'll be the first to do it this year. And every one of them is doing it. Here's the invite that we just handed out to my wife and I just made up, and we handed the first one out. So we just did up an invite. She went on, made up something, and we thought it would be helpful. You don't need the formality of that. You can just ask, but it helps to give people kind of definition of what neighborhood is going to be, because people don't know. You mean a 10-mile radius or 1 block or, whatever that is. And then just they kind of have time and space to prepare. And it also makes it low-key, because I define it as just a holiday, let's connect, get together kind of a thing. So kind of bringing it down to that. And so my challenge for you is that we want to ask everyone, unless there's some unusual circumstances, to at least really consider. Now, we want things led by the Spirit of God, not by, oh, it's a campaign, so, to be good, I have to do this. No. But I would ask you this. Set that aside and ask, are you sure God's not wanting you to do this? Well, that's a little uncomfortable. That's not what I asked. I guarantee it's uncomfortable. But maybe God would prompt you, yes, let's do it. Why not? Let me take the initiative. And I want to close with just a thought. I know some might say, so this whole, you really think this whole love your neighbor thing's a big deal? Yeah, I think it is. Real neighbors? Yeah. So we should have parties? Is that really right? Yeah. I want to close with the fact that what you and I need to discover is the power of parties. That's that's one of our biggest problems. It really is, because people think, I really don't know about that. You know that if you took parties out of the scriptures, in the New Testament, you'd be missing a whole lot. All the stories Jesus taught about parties, where he told that in a story, all about heaven having celebrations constantly going on in the backdrop of what's going on earth. Well, we're missing all that. How about the fact that Jesus was usually going to or from a party? How about the fact that that is why he was crucified, in part? Because of who he was gathering with and how he gathered, and that was a big deal. It offended religious people. How about the fact that the story is a reflection of that? Yeah, I think that we need to know the power of parties. Jesus changed the world by the way that he included people in life through parties. You might think, well, Pastor Brad, no, there's this other, there's partying. It doesn't mean what you think it means. Yes, I know what it means. Jesus' first thing he did was make not only wine, but really amazing wine, the stuff that people could get really out of control with. No, he didn't. The cheap stuff is what you're supposed to serve later after everyone's drank. You're supposed to serve, but he flips it, and he makes the best one, the stuff that people would actually be affected by. So what am I saying? I'm saying that if you're thinking to yourself, well, this can get really messy. People might come and get a little bit, should we say, a little bit overdone. People might not talk in an appropriate way. I know some of my neighbors, they really go off. Trust me, I know some of mine. Every other word. Or you know what? It could get into, it just can get messy. I'm giving you permission to be messy. And I will tell you this, you can be the message in the midst of the mess. Jesus was, and so can you be. Our greatest fear shouldn't be that we have a party and it's a little messy in terms of where people. Our greatest fear is that we're too religious to have the party. Trust me, that's what Jesus is concerned about. That we're so religious, we don't know how to have the party. I have not seen many surveys where people say, my primary, when I think of people who are Christians, my top thing of list is their party animals. It isn't there. It isn't there. It never makes it to the top. Which means they have no clear understanding of Jesus. Because Jesus came to change the nature of life and the way we celebrate it and the way we include people in it and the way we find joy in it. That sounds like the essence of a party. So be the message in the midst of the mess. Amen. Would you stand with me and let's pray. Let's pray together. Father, wow, we just feel like what you just so much want us to help us see is that we get caught up where so much can be like those who are so religious that they're trying to justify some kind of keep it clean, keep it neat life. And we just want to be honest with you. God, we're afraid of the mess that we see. Some of us just are afraid of being overloaded. We're afraid that we'll end up being responsible for everyone's life if we start to really connect with neighbors. But you've asked us merely to be who we need to be within our limits. We pray that you help give us incredible freedom now to be that. I pray for every introvert in this room who feels, oh no. I pray that you would really allow us to know that you're not asking us to be different. You're asking us to not be the life of the party, but to create connections, to merely be able to create space and sit down, to listen, to include. So I pray that you would really help us to shake off some kind of something we're not or can't be, and help us to embrace what we truly can be. And we pray that you would help us to love our neighbor, to make space, to overcome fears, to cross the road of indifference, and that you would be formed in us evermore now. So Jesus, our ultimate confession is, this might seem basic, but we don't got it down yet. Teach us more. Lead us in the way of loving our neighbor. We pray in your name. Amen.
Thank you for listening to the official broadcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles. Tune in for next week's message.